Today, we're going to talk about when you should find yourself a social media agency and when you should not. Now, since we've been a social media agency for 16 years, the first one in the United States, you probably think we're going to say that everyone should get a social media agency. Not true. We get calls every week from people who probably should not hire a social media agency. So we know when you should, we know when you shouldn't. I thought we'd start just by sharing some of that. Deidre, give me one of the reasons or one of the times or one of the reasons you would want to hire a social media agency. Why would you?
So you would if expertise and experience is important to you. If you don't have that on staff, but you need that breadth of experience from an agency that maybe works with a variety of industries, an agency that offers a variety of services. Because you may have someone who's really good at one thing, but that breadth of service may be really important to you. I would also say if you've got a strategy that's maybe complicated or needs some outside perspective, those are times that I think would be a really good moment to take a step back and say, maybe we need some outside help.
Okay. Lisa?
Well, one of the things that we continue to hear from folks is that social changes. And so their internal team that they've built either changes because someone decided to go and find another job somewhere, which happens, or the existing team that they have is really good at certain things, but not all the things that social requires. And so the speed of that changing means that even if someone is like, I don't need a social agency, I've got this all in house, or I've got agency partners, just the speed and the nature of it constantly shifting may mean that they just need a partner that doesn't have that long ramp up time of anytime you're onboarding someone internally. You're having to look at skill sets and you're having to really invest in like one person who's probably good at like one or two types of things. But if you need like a little bit of analytics, if you need a little bit of content production, but you also need, when you need it, you need like the specialty of it, then that helps you kind of scale your efforts really quickly without having to have like a 20-person team internally, which is also really costly. So
Yeah.
I think like I always joke that there's like no social media unicorn that just exists internally at times, because social, sometimes you need video content, you need text, you need community management. It all kind of comes back around. And every couple years we see the tides change and the needs change. And so to keep up with that, an agency can do that because we can have experts in all those different areas where it's really hard if you're staffing internally or even working with other agency partners where social is about this much of what they do. It can be hard to get that level of expertise, like Deidre was saying,
Yep.
and get that going really quickly.
Lisa, I
Yep.
think one of the great, out of all the great points you mentioned, one great point is when you have someone internally who only knows a small portion of the plethora of things that you can know about social. It's really tough to know everything and to be current on everything. And that idea that there's not a social unicorn, we say that internally also. There's no such thing because the industry changes constantly. And it's not just about algorithm changes, it's about all of the ways that you can post ads, the way that consumers are consuming social changes all the time. So just having the ability to keep up with all of those changes along with the changes in the platforms, I think, is why there is no unicorn, but it's also a reason that a brand may not have someone who can touch all of those points at any one given time. They may be really good at one area, but need some support and some help in some of the other areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, just to wrap a bow kind of around what Lisa and Deidre both said, is looking at the cost efficiency of hiring an agency. You don't necessarily, I think people always think the agencies are so expensive and that if they hire an agency, they have to hire them to do everything. But you can hire an agency and kind of cherry pick what services you need to support your team. It may be that you don't need content, but you might need reporting, or you may not need reporting or content, but you need some paid support. So it can be cost effective to kind of hone in on what are the key things that your team what and key areas that your team needs support in, and hiring an agency to do those specific things.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about cost, because if you look at an internal team and an agency, and they both hired someone at the exact same salary, the agency is going to cost about 2.5 times more per hour, because the agency has to cover that salary, all those benefits, which you may not be thinking about as their manager, but the company is thinking about, all the rent, all the overhead of the people who aren't working on that business, profit as well. All those things come into it, and so per hour, agencies are just mathematically always going to be more expensive. But if you want 10% of a media analytics person or an analytics person,
Yeah.
15% of a media person, 12% of an influencer person, then you get really cost effective in building a team much more efficiently than otherwise.
Yeah.
It's also the management of those people, right? There's a cost to just hiring them, but there's also a cost that I think we sometimes forget, particularly on the agency side. There's a cost to managing those people, and so if somebody's moving, or if somebody's having a baby, and you've got to backfill for that, even temporarily on the client side or on the brand side, who's going to fill that role? With an agency, you have a broader group of people to pick from who may be able to fill those roles temporarily until that person is back 100% of the time. Where on the clients on the brand side, and I know we haven't gotten there yet, you may not have a backfill, but that may be why hiring an agency, even for that period of time, might be a really good idea, because it gives you a temporary solution to a temporary problem.
People also forget about the cost of tools all the time when they hire
Yeah.
this person. I mean, we're paying for a content creation and approval system. We're paying for a tool to pull in data for what our audiences care about. We're paying for an influencer management tool. We're paying all of these things, and they're easily north of $100,000 a year that we're covering, and where the cost is sort of amortized
Yes.
across our clients. But if you're trying to try all those things in house, again, cost effectiveness those can be really hidden when you're spending hours going through Instagram manually looking for influencers because you don't have a tool. Well, you just burned tons of hours that you didn't need to burn.
Well, and sometimes there's tool costs that happen internally, and when internal teams are purchasing contracts and things like that for really large sums of money for tools that they can use, that's a cost that's not like a hidden cost. It's usually something that's not really being considered when you're looking at, should I staff this in house, get the amazing tools, but whatever they're selling at this point, whatever the sales reps are hounding you for. And sometimes you definitely need that tool, and that's 100% something that you absolutely have to have. But over and over again, well, we might see brands that have a really expensive tool, but their internal team isn't really set up to optimize that tool.
Yeah.
And then they could have probably even paid for an agency with some of that money. And, a lot of times our team might be, working natively for some brands because the tool costs don't make sense for that brand's
Right.
construct. So having someone to really understand like when you need a tool, when you don't need a tool. And if you could, instead of having a tool that gives you reporting that no one cares about internally ever, because it's never as good as it seems when you did the sales pitch, having an analyst from an agency compile all of your data and give that to you, that might be more valuable to you than just have a tool that no one actually uses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and is the tool good? Does it work the way it's supposed to work? Does your team, are they able to really understand it, understand how it's supposed to work and use it in that manner versus, you know, doing it by hand, as Jim said, sometimes we get very comfortable in what we know. And, some people are adverse to trying something new just because they feel it takes time to ramp up to get to the point where you're comfortable with the tool. We know that, right, Jim? It takes a minute to get comfortable. And then once you get comfortable with that tool, there's a new tool. There's
Mm-hmm.
something new. And you're like, oh, now we have to try it. We have to install and learn something else. So, and then when you talk about cost efficiencies, there's time to learn those tools and get up to speed on those tools, use them to some level of, maximum capacity for your brand, which still may not be, it still may not cover everything the tool can do, but you do it enough to get by.
Right.
Um, the other thing I was going to say is, when you think about social media from a brand's perspective and you don't have the buy-in or the understanding from senior level folks at that brand, social may not get the kind of attention and resources that it needs because there's not an understanding of the value of it. And so agencies can help brands teach and train and explore the value of that social truly brings, and not just the value but also why it works, how it works, but when you shouldn't use it, when it's not the right tool or the right resource, because we get into um, social can fix everything and it's
Yeah.
fast, and if there's a word
So,
that's misspelled, we just fix that word, right?
so we've been talking for almost 12 minutes on why you would want to hire a social agency.
Yeah.
And now we're going to argue with ourselves. We're going to take off one hat and put on another, like our own Taylor Glimpse would actually do if she wrote a
She
script.
would.
And we're going to talk about all the reasons you should hire internally. So, what are the benefits of hiring internally for a social team? And Brandy, I'll have you go first on this one.
Yeah, I think, and we've seen this with clients, that have hired us and then said, "Hey, maybe this isn't working. Maybe we should come with take a different approach with our relationship." And that's when a brand is very nuanced in their messaging. If they have very technical speak in how they talk to customers, that can only be captured in an internal environment where they use a lot of different acronyms that only they understand or that their customers understand. But when they are so ingrained and they have this deep, rich, like brand messaging, that is very hard to translate to other people who are, outside of that ecosystem. And sometimes we've seen clients like that, but what we see still is that they sometimes will come back and say, "Hey, we have this special project. Can you help us with this? Help our team with this?" Or like to Deidre's point, we have someone going on maternity leave. Can you just fill in for 2 or 3 months to get us by? So there are times where it will be that we may say or they may say, "This isn't jiving. We're not able to show you the value that you need, and we think that you're better off if you hire a team internally." Also with that is just the availability. A lot of people think that when you hire an agency, you just do a 2-day brain dump and they know everything about you and that they never need to call you again. But you still have to be available. There's still questions that need to be answered. There's still nuances that need to be worked through. There's still content that needs to be approved or presentations that need to happen. So if you have a team that is tied up in a lot of meetings, they travel a lot, they're not readily available, it might be better to just have a team in-house on the ground that knows how to push and pull those stakeholders to get the buy-in that they need to be able to move social forward for that brand.
Well, and
Yeah, I
Brandy,
think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
go
teacher.
ahead, Lisa.
Well, one of the things that we notice is, not necessarily the complexity of content, because we can, as an agency, we can learn that complexity, but it's that whenever you have multiple stakeholders creating content, they're subject matter experts that have to create the content because it's coming from within. There's stories that need to be surfaced. It's always helpful, and you can still work in it with a social agency. I know I'm supposed to be completely against it right now, but you can still do that in that construct. But it's really needed to have at least one person hired internally to manage those stakeholders and subject matter experts, because it's super challenging from the outside to know exactly how to navigate those internal dynamics
Yes.
and get what you need. So if you have a subject matter expert that's supposed to deliver customer case studies, especially on the B2B side, whatever that cadence looks like, it's very helpful to have someone internally, regardless of if you still have an agency helping you with certain things. You should
Yeah.
really need a staff for that one person, at least to pull all the pieces together and to make sure that you can have a source that can pull it together, get approvals, get stakeholder buy-in. And we've found that to be incredibly helpful. So when there isn't that and a client's like, we need you to talk to 12 different clients internally just to create a content calendar, it's like, that's going to be very expensive to do that. And we might not know how to do that as well as someone internally. So that's an area where we're a little bit like, maybe you need someone internally at least first, and then maybe talk to us after.
And just
Well,
to
and
add on to
speaking,
what Lisa's saying, not when you say stakeholders, you're not just talking about C-suite, right? A lot of times when
right.
people hear internal stakeholders, they're thinking about directors, VPs, SVPs, and C-suite, but we're talking about brands that have multiple different brand managers in their different verticals, that may have a PR team that has a stake in social, that may have an internal communications team that might have a stake in social, and then you layer on that potentially a sales team that has a stake in social, and you're talking about trying to coordinate all those people to and have them relay multiple different messages to an agency. That's really when that internal person that Lisa's talking about comes in handy, that knows how to push and pull and navigate those internal dynamics.
Well, and in thinking about those different roles, the cost saving side, so we're going to flip it and talk about the cost saving side for a brand. Oftentimes you can hire a person and they can do a couple of different jobs. They can have a couple of different responsibilities. And so cost savings for a brand on the flip side of this conversation is, there's an extension of that work. So yes, they know all the internal workings of the brand. They know who to go to for what and how to get it, but they also may have to serve multiple roles, particularly depending on the budget and the size of the organization. So there's also that they may not be able to afford to hire three people to do three different things in social, but they've got to be just good enough to handle a certain set of things.
Yeah, and staying with cost for a second, um, it like I already mentioned, it's going to be cheaper per hour to have an internal team. But the other factor that comes in is what's your budget and what's your corporate commitment to social media as an important channel.
Mm-hmm.
We were on a call the other day with a prospect who wanted a fair amount of stuff done. And we pushed them on budget. They asked us to come up with it. That never works. So we pushed a little harder on budget. And finally they said, what can you do for $3,000 a month? Now, if it's my money, $3,000 a month sounds like a lot of money. But if you're actually hiring someone to do something, that's $36,000 a year. And I don't know if you've seen the unemployment rate or the cost of labor recently, but you're not getting a lot of talent for $36,000 a year. And so, that there can be those, depending on what your budget is, the only answer may be to stay internally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like Deidre said, there might be cost savings in someone's role where social is a part of their role and they're
Right.
doing other aspects of marketing. And that makes sense for where you are as a brand. And I think that budget and being honest with that budget in light of also your organization's overall objectives. Sometimes I feel like we might get on a new business call, and the person has this laundry list of objectives for a budget that just doesn't match that. And being true to really where should your resources internally be focused from a marketing standpoint is definitely another consideration, because if you are a certain type of industry, you might benefit from certain types of social media approaches. Others may need to prioritize based on their budget and where they're going. You may need to approach, email or trade shows or something else more important than social based on your overall marketing budget. And only you, as the marketing person internally can really have visibility into that. But often when we get into conversations, knowing the objectives and the budget and saying, wait a minute, if this is really what you're trying to do and this is your budget, maybe there is another marketing approach that you should put more emphasis on, and have someone internally just make sure that your social lights are on. That's probably not the greatest answer in terms of like what you want a social media marketing agency to say to you, but it also can be very true. And sometimes when we're having those discussions, it also may bring to light that maybe some of what brands are seeing that they should do because they see other brands doing, they feel this like need that they should also do it. And that's something to also be aware of, just the amount of a task that you're putting on your internal social team may not be in line with what value you're getting from it, and what investment you should make in it might not be aligned. And so at times it is helpful to have an external party even look at that, even if it is just a quick call to say that doesn't make no sense. You need to probably go internally and talk about this more before trying to do an RFP or try to find another partner.
I think you just coined a new phrase, Lisa, making sure your social media lights are on.
Yeah. Trademark.
Trademark. So I'm going to wrap this up. It's about 21 plus minutes already. I think we know that the internal people have a deep understanding of what's happening. You can have full control over your social. The agency has experience with other brands, scalability, deep expertise across multiple sub-disciplines of social media. That's why a lot of people choose a hybrid approach where they have an internal person or persons doing some of those things, and then the social media agency wraps around them. That's a really good solution for a lot of clients. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Deidre, Lisa, and Brandy. I appreciate you debating yourselves and taking that mental exercise for a minute. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.